Sam Vinograd is still with me here at the desk, and I'm grateful that you have stayed with us. Sam, to Anna's point, so the May shooting, two members of the Israeli embassy shot and killed, that was one of the reasons the White House pointed to explain the necessity of bringing in the National Guard and this large federalized crime-fighting task force. That's point one. Point two, when Anna referred to what appears to be or feels to her as a lockdown in the flow of information, right near the end of the press briefing, some reporters asked, have you engaged in any conversation with the suspect? They didn't deal with that. How do you interpret those?
Well, on your second question regarding a lockdown in information, we've already had misinformation, perhaps. We had the governor of West Virginia release a horrifically tragic update about the reported death of the two National Guardsmen, only to retract it. So in this moment, they clearly want to be transparent with the public, but they also want to make sure they're getting their facts straight. That's very important. They don't want to evoke panic or a false sense of calm. Now, I will tell you, Major, having worked on counterterrorism at DHS for several years, no matter how much law enforcement you have in an area, trying to find a lone actor is worse than trying to find a needle in a haystack. So you
mean before the fact?
Before the fact,
right.
Trying to prevent a lone actor from engaging in an act of violence is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult because if they are talking to others, it's oftentimes in dark corners of the web. And so you're having a harder time just tracking down their communications and their planning before the fact. We saw that play out in front of when the two Israeli embassy officials were killed, and potentially we're seeing that play out right now. And that comes to the point about the Secretary of War indicating that more National Guardsmen will be deployed to Washington, D.C., 500 more in the aftermath of this horrific event. I am just not certain that deploying more officers physically to Washington, D.C. alone is going to solve this problem. It really has to involve extensive information gathering, intelligence gathering to try to prevent this act of violence well before an individual with a gun is walking armed on the streets of Washington, D.C. And I will just add, Major, we have seen a degradation in intelligence and information gathering as there have been huge cuts to the federal workforce.
To the point about the National Guard, the deployment and these high visibility patrols, in the conversations that you ever had about counterterrorism or dealing with things in a public space, what is the debate that goes on internally about visibility versus invisibility and achieving goals from a law enforcement perspective?
Well, it's not a zero-sum game. So the fact that you have a physical presence both to deter individuals from acting and then to respond if an act of violence starts to unfold is just one piece of the puzzle. And getting right-sizing that presence should be up to law enforcement professionals, not policy professionals, individuals that are used to making those kinds of calls. But that's just one piece of the puzzle, Major. The actual act of preventing an act of violence doesn't involve armed personnel on scene. It involves very careful information and intelligence gathering. It involves prevention work in communities to try to educate people about the signs and individuals going down a pathway to violence and much more. So it's incredibly important that we have the right number of law enforcement professionals on the ground in Washington, D.C. to fight crime and potentially counterterrorism operations. But we also need other officials at the other end of the spectrum trying to prevent this stuff before it even happens.
Anna Schecter, I am told that your phone connection is slightly better. I certainly hope that's true because we want to hear every single word you have to say. Any other reporting or observations you have on what is a fast-moving and fluid situation?
Well, more surveillance footage is coming in, and we are analyzing those videos. Law enforcement is certainly analyzing those videos to look at what happened from all angles. They want to find out if there was any kind of an interaction with law enforcement before shots were fired. That is what they are drilling down on right now. Investigators are trying to get the answer to that question, so I'm hoping to get some more information on that soon. But that is another line of questioning, exactly what transpired before those shots were fired. Doesn't appear that they spoke, but they're trying to determine if he might have said something before pulling the trigger.
And Anna, to follow up on that point, when authorities, as they have described this as a targeted and ambush-style encounter, that means, from your vantage point and in the vernacular of law enforcement, for the benefit of the audience, what does that mean?
That means that law enforcement was not engaging in a mission where they had guns drawn and there was the potential to have some kind of an altercation. They were going about their business unaware that there was a threat and the attacker opened fire. So that is a targeted, intentional attack that, in law enforcement terms, many law enforcement would use the term ambush to describe that type of an attack.
Anna Schecter, our senior coordinating producer in our Crime and Public Safety Unit, thank you so very much. Sam, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just one other thought is, at this point, we don't even know if the suspect has been identified. What we've seen unfold in various investigations is, in the first instance, looking if this individual had any identification on the suspect's person. And we have seen other instances in which suspects had no ID. And so just figuring out who they were took more time. Obviously, in the case of the United Healthcare CEO's assassination, it took the public's help in identifying the suspect in that case. So at this moment, we actually just don't know if the suspect has been identified. That could be accomplished through biometric identification, fingerprints, and other matters. And the public may also be helpful in that regard. As it pertains to an ambush-style attack, these National Guardsmen here in D.C., we see them all the time. Mm-hmm. They're everywhere. And they have very specific rules of engagement. Certainly being fired upon meets the threshold of engaging in a counteraction. But these individuals, the National Guardsmen, ostensibly were armed. Part of their job in crime fighting here in D.C. is to be on the lookout for potential threats. And FBI Director Patel made a very important point during his press conference, which is these individuals' training kicked in. They responded to the ambush and prevented an even worse scenario from playing out. And I think we're going to learn more about that in the days ahead.
But to that point, and I want to dig in on that just a minute, the National Guard personnel here are essentially patrollers. They are not active police detectives or going down places. They're just sort of working the perimeter of wherever they are in a visible way, again, to Nicole Skanga's earlier point, to achieve a deterrent effect. But they're not acting like cops. They're not trained like cops, and they're not invested with the authority.
Legally authorized.
Not legally
Yes.
authorized to be cops, and that's an important distinction.
Certainly.
And limiting to their role.
It is, but they are here to patrol, to look for threats, and then to alert law enforcement to
be
those
eyes
threats.
and ears.
An ambush-style attack, there are split seconds to respond. Being fired upon is probably not something that they had in their plans for the day. But according to Director Patel, and again, we're going to learn more about this, once the ambush started, training kicked in and there was a response. And we'll learn more about who responded, how and when going forward.
Sam Vinograd here with me at the desk, Anna Schecter on the phone. Thank you very much. We are going to continue with our rolling and breaking news coverage of the shooting 2 blocks from the White House involving National Guard personnel, suspect in custody, both National Guard personnel deployed from West Virginia in critical condition. We'll be back in just a moment.